Hey there! Grab yourself a coffee and enjoy the story. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on Eleanor Wilson's face as she meticulously arranged breakfast on the dining table. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of homemade blueberry pancakes, Melissa's favorite since childhood. Eleanor glanced at her watch. It was 7:30. Her daughter and son-in-law would be down any minute. She smoothed her hand over her short blonde hair, tucking a stray strand behind her ear, and adjusted the floral scarf around her neck, a gift from her late husband, Thomas, before cancer took him 5 years ago. "Is breakfast ready yet?" Jason's voice boomed from the stairway, lacking any hint of a morning greeting. Eleanor forced a smile. "Good morning, Jason." "Yes, everything's set." Jason Bennett strode into the kitchen, still in his pajamas, despite having to leave for work in less than an hour. At 32, he possessed the kind of confident swagger that some might find charming at first glance. Eleanor had once thought so too, before living under the same roof revealed his true nature. "The pancakes are cold," he complained after taking a single bite. "And where's my protein shake? I told you yesterday I needed one this morning." Eleanor's smile faltered. "I'm sorry. I don't recall you mentioning a protein shake." "Well, I did." Jason pushed his plate away. "You never listen. How hard is it to remember one simple thing?" Before Eleanor could respond, Melissa appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her nurse's scrubs. Her blonde hair, so much like her mother's, pulled back in a neat ponytail. "Mom, did you forget Jason's shake again?" Melissa sighed, her voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment that had become increasingly common over the past 2 years. "I'm afraid I did," Eleanor admitted, though she was certain no such conversation had taken place. This had become a pattern, Jason claiming she'd forgotten things she was sure he'd never mentioned. "It's fine. I'll just grab something at work," Jason muttered, making a show of his inconvenience as he stomped back upstairs. Once he was out of earshot, Eleanor turned to her daughter. "Melissa, sweetheart, we need to talk about—" "Not now, Mom." Melissa cut her off, checking her phone. "I'm already running late for my shift, and now I need to make Jason shake before I leave." Eleanor watched as her daughter hurriedly prepared the protein drink, noticing the dark circles under Melissa's eyes. "You look tired, dear. Are you getting enough rest?" "I'm fine," Melissa replied curtly. "Unlike some people, I have a full-time job and responsibilities." The barb stung. Eleanor had worked as a financial advisor for 28 years before retiring early to care for Thomas during his illness. After his death, she had dedicated herself to supporting Melissa through nursing school, and had even used a significant portion of Thomas's life insurance to purchase this house as a wedding gift for Melissa and Jason 3 years ago. What had begun as a temporary arrangement, moving in to help the newlyweds get established, had somehow morphed into an indefinite situation where Eleanor found herself covering the mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, and even the payments on Melissa's student loans, all from her pension and savings, all while being treated increasingly like an unwelcome guest rather than family. "Here, take these pancakes to work for lunch," Eleanor offered, wrapping some in foil. "No sense in letting them go to waste." Melissa accepted the package with a distracted thanks before rushing out the door, not even bothering with a goodbye kiss. Once a daily ritual between mother and daughter, the house fell silent. Eleanor sat at the empty table, her own breakfast growing cold, and stared at the family photo hanging on the wall across from her. It had been taken at Melissa's wedding, all smiles and promises. Thomas's absence was a palpable void in the picture, but they had still been a family then. When had things changed so dramatically? With a sigh, Eleanor began clearing the table. As she rinsed the dishes, she noticed a stack of envelopes tucked partially under the fruit bowl, mail she hadn't seen before. Curious, she pulled them out, and immediately recognized the logo of First National Bank, where she had worked for nearly 3 decades before retirement. The letter was addressed to Jason Bennett, but what caught Eleanor's eye was the reference number at the top, one that matched the property deed for this very house, a house that was legally still in her name, though she had promised it to Melissa and Jason once they had stable finances. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before opening the envelope. What she read made her blood run cold. It was a rejection letter for a home equity loan application, an application she had never approved or even known about, an application bearing what appeared to be her forged signature. Her hands trembled as she set the letter down. This wasn't the first troubling discovery she'd made recently. Last week, she had found credit card statements showing charges at several casinos in the neighboring town. The week before that, she had answered a call from a collection agency looking for Jason regarding an overdue personal loan. Eleanor had tried to discuss these concerns with Melissa, but her daughter always defended Jason, accusing Eleanor of meddling or misunderstanding. "He works in sales, Mom. Those casino charges are business dinners with clients," Melissa had insisted. But Eleanor knew better. The late nights Jason claimed to be working overtime never seemed to result in larger paychecks. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Jason's return. Eleanor quickly replaced the letter in its envelope and tucked it into her pocket. "I'm heading out," Jason announced, now dressed in a crisp shirt and tie that Eleanor had ironed the night before. "Make sure you pick up my dry cleaning today. And the house is a mess. You really should vacuum and dust while we're gone." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "Jason, I think we need to have a conversation about household responsibilities. I'm not your housekeeper." Jason's expression darkened. "Excuse me. You live here rent-free, don't you? The least you could do is pull your weight." Eleanor felt a flash of indignation. "Rent-free? I've been paying the mortgage on this house since you and Melissa moved in, not to mention the utilities, insurance, and most of the groceries." "That's what mothers do," Jason replied dismissively. "Besides, you promised this house would be ours. If you're keeping score of every penny, maybe you should have been clearer about your expectations." Before Eleanor could respond, Jason's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned, and headed for the door. "Just do the cleaning, Eleanor. We can talk about your living arrangement later if you're unhappy with the current setup." The door slammed behind him, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the kitchen, the morning sunlight now feeling harsh rather than warm. She reached for her own phone and pulled up her banking app, scrolling through the automatic payments that left her account each month. Mortgage, both car insurance policies, utilities, credit card payments on accounts where Melissa was an authorized user, and countless other expenses that had somehow become her responsibility. The total was staggering. At this rate, her savings would be depleted within a year. And then what? Her pension alone wouldn't cover everything. She had been so focused on helping Melissa build a life that she'd neglected to protect her own future. Eleanor's finger hovered over the bank's customer service number. It would be so easy to cancel everything, to stop the financial bleeding. But what would that mean for Melissa? Her daughter had made mistakes, yes, but could Eleanor really pull the rug out from under her own child? The house phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Eleanor answered to hear the familiar voice of Frank Martinez, her former colleague, and one of the few friends she'd managed to maintain after Thomas's death. "Eleanor, I'm glad I caught you," Frank said, his voice carrying a note of concern. "I need to talk to you about something important. It's regarding some paperwork that came across my desk this morning. Is there any chance you could meet me for coffee today?" "What kind of paperwork?" Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. "A loan application with your signature on it," Frank replied. "Except I've known you for 20 years, and that's not your signature." Eleanor closed her eyes, her worst fears confirmed. "I'll meet you at Carson's Cafe at 11. And Frank, thank you for calling." After hanging up, Eleanor stood in the silent house that had once been her dream gift to her daughter, a gift that had somehow transformed into a gilded cage. Something had to change, and as the morning sun illuminated the dust particles floating in the air, Eleanor realized with sudden clarity that the change would have to begin with her. She walked to the bedroom that had once been the master suite before Jason and Melissa claimed it. leaving her with the smaller guest room at the end of the hall. She opened her closet and pulled out the suitcase that had sat untouched since their last family vacation, 5 years ago, when Thomas was still alive, and Melissa still looked at her with love instead of impatience. Eleanor wasn't planning to leave, not yet, but she needed to be prepared. Whatever Frank had to show her at their meeting would determine her next steps. As she placed the suitcase on her bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked tired, diminished somehow. But beneath the weariness, Eleanor could see a flicker of the strength that had carried her through Thomas's illness and death. That strength wasn't gone. It had merely been dormant. "Enough is enough," she whispered to her reflection. For too long, she had allowed herself to be taken advantage of in the name of maternal love. But true love, the kind Thomas had shown her, the kind she had always tried to show Melissa, didn't enable dependency or disrespect. True love empowered, and sometimes it had to be tough. Eleanor checked her watch again. 3 hours until her meeting with Frank. 3 hours to gather her thoughts and courage. 3 hours before she would have to decide whether to continue down this unsustainable path or forge a new one, for Melissa's sake as much as her own. The bell above the door at Carson's Cafe chimed softly as Eleanor entered. The familiar aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries enveloped her as she scanned the quaint establishment for Frank. She spotted him at their usual corner table, 2 steaming mugs already waiting. Despite the gravity of the situation, seeing her old friend brought a genuine smile to her face. Frank stood as she approached. At 54, he still maintained the same professional appearance he'd had during their years working together. Salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, and that reassuring smile that had helped countless clients through financial crises. "Eleanor," he greeted her, pulling out a chair. "I ordered your usual. Still taking it with 2 sugars and a splash of cream?" "Some habits never change," she replied, settling into the seat. "Though lately I've been thinking maybe it's time for new habits." Frank's expression turned serious as he reached into his briefcase and extracted a manila folder. "Before we get to that, I want you to look at these." He opened the folder to reveal several documents: loan applications, property assessments, and what appeared to be a partially completed deed transfer. All bore signatures purporting to be Eleanor's. "These came across my desk because of a flag in our system," Frank explained. "Someone tried to use your house as collateral for a $100,000 loan. The signature verification triggered an alert because it didn't match your signature on file." Eleanor studied the documents, her stomach knotting at the sight of the crude forgeries. "Jason," she murmured. "That would be my guess," Frank agreed. "The loan application lists him as the primary borrower with you as the co-signer. The interesting part is what he planned to use the money for." He tapped a section of the application. "Debt consolidation," it says here. But our background check revealed multiple outstanding debts to 3 different casinos within a 50-mile radius. Eleanor felt the color drain from her face. "How much are we talking about?" "Based on what we could verify, at least $70,000, possibly more with private lenders." The cafe suddenly seemed too warm, the background chatter too loud. Eleanor took a sip of her coffee, buying time to process this revelation. "I knew about the casino visits. I found some credit card statements, but I had no idea the debt was this extensive." Frank leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, this isn't just about debt. This is fraud. He forged your signature on legal documents. That's a criminal offense." "I can't report him to the police," Eleanor protested, thinking of Melissa. "It would destroy my daughter." "And what happens when he succeeds in taking out a loan using your house, your only significant asset, as collateral? What happens when he gambles that away, too?" Frank's voice was gentle but firm. "You've known me long enough to know I don't give advice lightly. You need to protect yourself, and maybe, by extension, you'll be protecting Melissa, too." Eleanor stared down at the documents, at the crude approximation of her signature. Each fraudulent line felt like a personal betrayal. "What would you do, Frank?" "I'd start by securing my assets. If you still intend to give the house to Melissa someday, that's your choice. But for now, I'd make absolutely certain no one can borrow against it without your explicit consent." He hesitated before adding, "And I'd reconsider my living arrangement." For several minutes, they sat in silence, the cafe bustling around them as Eleanor contemplated her options. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and met Frank's concerned gaze. "I need copies of all of these documents, and I need to know what other financial safeguards I should put in place immediately." Frank nodded, relief evident in his expression. "That's the Eleanor Wilson I know." By the time Eleanor left Carson's cafe 2 hours later, she had a comprehensive plan in place. Frank had helped her contact the bank's fraud department, place a freeze on her credit, and initiate changes to her accounts that would prevent unauthorized access. He had also referred her to Patricia Lawson, a lawyer friend who specialized in estate planning and elder law. "Elder law?" Eleanor had repeated with a wry smile. "Is that what I am now? An elder?" "You're a woman with assets that need protecting," Frank had corrected her. "And Patricia is the best in the business." Now, as Eleanor drove back toward the house, she could no longer bring herself to call it home. She felt a curious mixture of dread and determination. The conversation with Melissa and Jason wouldn't be pleasant, but it was long overdue. She parked in the driveway and noticed with surprise that both Melissa's and Jason's cars were present. Melissa should have been at the hospital for another 3 hours, and Jason rarely returned home before 7 in the evening. As Eleanor entered the house, she heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. She paused in the hallway, her hand still on the doorknob. "I can't believe you were so stupid!" Melissa's voice, thick with tears. "How could you forge her signature? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about digging us out of the hole your shopping addiction put us in," Jason shot back. "Do you have any idea how much those credit cards of yours cost each month? Not to mention your student loans." "My student loans? Mom's been paying those. And don't you dare blame this on me. I saw the casino statements, Jason. $52,000 in the last year alone. That's more than I make in an entire year as a nurse." Eleanor stood frozen, absorbing the implications of what she was hearing. They knew about the loan application. The bank must have contacted them directly after her meeting with Frank. "Your mother was going to give us this house anyway." Jason's voice had taken on a wheedling quality. "I just accelerated the timeline a bit. Once we had the loan, I could have made some strategic bets and cleared all our debts. I was one good night away from fixing everything." "One good night?" Melissa's laugh was harsh, hysterical. "That's what you said last month when you took my anniversary diamond necklace to that pawn shop. The necklace my father gave me before he died." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas had saved for years to buy that necklace, presenting it to Melissa on her 21st birthday, with the instruction to wear it at her wedding someday. The thought of it sitting in a pawn shop while Jason gambled away their future was unbearable. She was about to step into the kitchen when Jason's next words stopped her cold. "Your mother is the problem here, not me. She's been holding that house over our heads for years, acting like she's doing us some huge favor by letting us live in what's supposed to be our home. If she wasn't constantly hovering, monitoring every penny we spend, we wouldn't be in this situation. She pays our bills, Jason. She buys our groceries. How can you possibly blame her because she's made you dependent on her? Can't you see that? She's controlling you through money, just like she always has. The sooner we get that house in our names, the better. Then we can finally ask her to leave, and we can live our lives without her constant judgment." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor waited, hardly daring to breathe, for her daughter's response. "Maybe you're right," Melissa finally said, her voice subdued. "Maybe it's time Mom found her own place." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She stumbled back from the door, her vision blurring with unshed tears. After everything, the years of support, the financial sacrifices, the endless household work, this was what her daughter truly thought of her. Eleanor retreated silently to her bedroom, closing the door with trembling hands. The suitcase still lay open on her bed from earlier that morning, a premonition she hadn't fully understood until now. With methodical precision born from shock, Eleanor began to pack clothes, toiletries, important documents, the photo album of Thomas and Melissa that she kept on her nightstand, her jewelry, including the pearl earrings Thomas had given her on their 25th anniversary, the last gift he'd presented before his diagnosis. She worked quickly, efficiently, her mind racing ahead to logistics. She would check into the Riverside Hotel downtown until she could find a suitable apartment. She would call Patricia Lawson first thing in the morning to begin formal proceedings to protect her assets. A knock on her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Mom?" Melissa's voice. "Are you in there? We need to talk." Eleanor took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and opened the door. Melissa stood in the hallway, her eyes red-rimmed but her expression hardened with resolve. Jason loomed behind her, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders. "We need to have a family discussion," Melissa began, not quite meeting Eleanor's eyes. "I believe I've already heard enough of your discussion," Eleanor replied quietly. Melissa had the grace to look ashamed. "You were eavesdropping?" "I was coming home. To my house. The house I paid for with the life insurance money when your father died. The house where the mortgage, utilities, and insurance are automatically deducted from my bank account each month." Eleanor's voice remained steady, though her heart was racing. "So, yes, I heard your conversation about forged loan applications, gambling debts, and pawning your father's gift." Jason stepped forward. "Now, look, Eleanor." "No, you look." Eleanor cut him off, surprising even herself with her firmness. "I've spent the morning with the bank's fraud department and my lawyer. I know exactly how much trouble you're in, Jason. The only reason you're not speaking to the police right now is because I've asked them to give me 24 hours before filing an official report." Jason's face paled. "You're bluffing." Eleanor reached into her purse and extracted copies of the documents Frank had provided. "Fraud carries a minimum sentence of 5 years in this state. Add to that identity theft, and you're looking at up to 15 years. "Mom, you can't seriously be threatening to send Jason to jail," Melissa protested. "I'm not threatening anything. I'm stating facts." Eleanor turned her attention back to her daughter. "For 3 years, I've supported you both. I paid off your student loans. I've covered every expense in this household. And in return, I've been treated like an unwelcome guest at best, an unpaid servant at worst." "That's not fair," Melissa began, but Eleanor held up her hand. "Let me finish. I love you, Melissa. You're my daughter, and nothing will ever change that. But love doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior. It doesn't mean allowing myself to be used and discarded." Eleanor gestured to the suitcase on her bed. "I was already packing when you knocked, not because you want me gone, but because I've finally realized I need to go, for all our sakes." "So you're just leaving? Just like that?" Melissa's voice cracked. "Yes," Eleanor replied simply. "But understand this. When I walk out that door, all financial support stops immediately. The mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, everything. You and Jason will need to decide how to manage on your own." Jason snorted. "You can't do that. Your name is on all those accounts." "Yes, my name, not yours." Eleanor fixed him with a level gaze. "You have 30 days to arrange alternative financing for the mortgage, or the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings. As for the credit cards you've been using, they've already been canceled." The color drained from Jason's face as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "You vindictive bit!" "Don't," Melissa warned him, stepping between her husband and mother. She turned back to Eleanor, her expression a mixture of anger and fear. "So, this is it? You're punishing us because we want some independence?" "Independence means supporting yourself, Melissa. It means paying your own bills and making your own way. Eleanor zipped up her suitcase with finality. I'm not punishing you. I'm stepping back and allowing you both to experience the consequences of your choices. And what about your choices? Melissa demanded. You chose to move in with us. You chose to pay our bills. Now you're just walking away because things got tough? Eleanor looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw beneath the defensive anger to the frightened girl beneath. She softened her tone. I'm walking away because it's the only way you'll ever learn to stand on your own. I did you no favors by sheltering you from reality for so long. That was my mistake, and I'm correcting it now. She picked up her suitcase and moved toward the door. Jason stepped aside, his expression dark with barely contained rage. Melissa remained frozen, tears streaming down her face. I'll contact you in a few days, once we've all had time to process this, Eleanor said, as she reached the front door. In the meantime, I suggest you both take a hard look at your finances and start making some difficult decisions. Mom, wait, Melissa called, but Eleanor had already stepped outside, the door closing softly behind her. The late afternoon sun warmed her face as Eleanor walked to her car, placed her suitcase in the trunk, and slid into the driver's seat. Her hands were steady as she started the engine, though her heart felt as though it might shatter at any moment. As she pulled away from the curb, Eleanor caught a glimpse of Melissa watching from the window, Jason nowhere in sight. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Eleanor allowed herself one final thought before driving away. Sometimes, the greatest act of love a mother could perform was allowing her child to fail, so they could learn to rise again on their own terms. The Riverside Hotel was neither luxurious nor particularly charming, but it offered clean rooms, reasonable rates, and, most importantly, anonymity. Eleanor had chosen it specifically because it was unlikely anyone would think to look for her there. Not that she expected Melissa or Jason to come searching. Their pride would prevent that, at least initially. Eleanor sat on the edge of the queen-sized bed, the generic beige comforter crinkling beneath her. The room's bland decor and faint scent of industrial cleaner were a stark contrast to the home she had left behind. But there was something freeing about the impersonal space. No expectations, no disappointments, no reminders of all she had lost. She reached for her phone and found 7 missed calls, 5 from Melissa, 2 from Jason, and a dozen text messages ranging from pleading to accusatory. She set the phone aside without responding. What could she possibly say that hadn't already been said? Instead, she opened her laptop and methodically began the process of securing her financial future. One by one, she canceled automatic payments, the mortgage on a house she no longer occupied, insurance for cars she didn't drive, utilities for appliances she wouldn't use, credit cards that had funded a lifestyle she couldn't afford to support. With each cancellation, she felt a curious mixture of guilt and relief. When she reached the final item, Melissa's student loan payments, her finger hesitated over the Confirm Cancellation button. This had been her gift to her daughter, a promise made when Melissa was accepted into nursing school. Focus on your studies. Don't worry about the cost. Your father and I have saved for this. Thomas had been so proud when Melissa earned her nursing degree. Our girl's going to heal people, Ellie, he had said, his voice already weakened by the cancer that would take him just months later. What better legacy could we ask for? The memory of his voice, still so clear after 5 years, brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes. What would Thomas think of the situation now? Of their daughter's entitlement? Of Eleanor's decision to cut financial ties? He would understand, Eleanor decided. Thomas had always believed in teaching responsibility alongside generosity. With renewed resolve, she clicked the confirmation button. The payment cancellation was complete. A soft knock on the door startled Eleanor from her thoughts. For a brief, hopeful moment, she wondered if Melissa had somehow found her. But when she opened the door, it was Frank Martinez who stood in the hallway, holding a paper bag that emanated the delicious aroma of Chinese food. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his expression concerned. "You weren't answering your phone, and I was worried." Eleanor stepped back to let him enter. "I've been preoccupied." Frank set the food on the small desk by the window and turned to face her. "I take it the conversation with Melissa and Jason didn't go well?" "That's putting it mildly." Eleanor gave him a brief account of the confrontation, each word painful to speak aloud. "So here I am, homeless at 52. "Not homeless," Frank corrected gently. "Just between homes, and not without resources." He gestured to the laptop still open on the bed. "I see you've been busy." "Dismantling a life takes less time than you might think," Eleanor said with a bitter smile. 3 years of financial support, undone in an afternoon. Frank began unpacking the food. Containers of kung pao chicken, beef with broccoli, steamed rice, and egg rolls. The familiar ritual of a meal shared with a friend provided a small comfort in the midst of chaos. "What happens now?" Frank asked, as they settled into their makeshift dinner. Eleanor poked at her rice with chopsticks. "I have a meeting with Patricia Lawson tomorrow morning to discuss legal options. I need to find an apartment, preferably something month to month until I decide what I want, long term. And I should probably start looking for a job. My pension covers my basic needs, but not much beyond that." "You know there's always a place for you at First National," Frank offered. "Harrison would hire you back in a heartbeat." The thought of returning to her old desk, resuming the career she'd left to care for Thomas, was both appealing and daunting. "Maybe," she conceded, "but first, I need to deal with the Jason situation." Frank's expression turned serious. "Have you decided whether to press charges?" Eleanor set down her chopsticks with a sigh. "No. Part of me wants to see him face consequences. He committed fraud, Frank. He tried to steal my house. But sending him to prison won't undo the damage. And it would devastate Melissa. She chose him over you," Frank reminded her, his tone gentle but firm. "She's still my daughter." Eleanor stared out the window at the darkening sky. "I keep thinking about what Thomas would do in this situation." "Thomas would protect you," Frank said without hesitation. "He would want you to stand up for yourself." Eleanor knew he was right. Thomas had always been her fiercest advocate, encouraging her to value herself even when others didn't. In the years since his death, she had gradually lost sight of that lesson, allowing her self-worth to erode under the constant demands and criticism from Jason, and, increasingly, from Melissa. "I'll decide after meeting with Patricia," she finally said. "For tonight, I just want to eat Chinese food and not think about any of it." Frank respected her wish, steering the conversation toward lighter topics. A mutual friend's retirement, changes at the bank, a new restaurant downtown that supposedly served the best steak in 3 counties. By the time he left 2 hours later, Eleanor felt marginally more balanced, though the weight of her situation remained. Alone again, Eleanor prepared for bed with the strange self-consciousness that comes from performing familiar rituals in unfamiliar surroundings. The hotel toiletries were generic, the towels thin, the bathroom lighting harsh and unflattering. As she stared at her reflection, noting the fine lines around her eyes, the slight droop of her jawline, the weariness etched into her features, Eleanor found herself wondering when she had started to look so old. Not old, she corrected herself. Experienced. This face had loved, lost, persevered. It had smiled through Thomas's good days and remained steady through his worst. It had beamed with pride at Melissa's graduation and maintained dignity through countless small humiliations at Jason's hands. This face, with its lines and imperfections, belonged to a woman who had survived and would continue to survive, no matter what came next. Eleanor slept fitfully that night, her dreams a confusing blend of past and present. Thomas appeared, healthy and whole, warning her about something she couldn't quite understand. Melissa as a child, crying for her mother but running away when Eleanor tried to approach. Jason, his face distorted into a grotesque mask, counting stacks of money that turned to ash in his hands. She awoke before dawn, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? What had happened? Then reality rushed back, bringing with it a fresh wave of grief and determination. Eleanor showered, dressed in one of her more professional outfits, a navy skirt suit she had worn countless times during her banking career, and headed down to the hotel lobby for coffee. Her meeting with Patricia Lawson wasn't until 9, but she couldn't bear the thought of spending another minute in that impersonal room with only her thoughts for company. The hotel's complimentary breakfast was simple but adequate. Coffee, pastries, fruit, and yogurt. Eleanor selected an apple and a cup of coffee, finding a quiet corner table where she could observe the other guests without engaging. Business people checking emails on their phones, families herding children and juggling baggage, a couple arguing in hushed, tense voices by the elevator. All these lives intersecting briefly in this transitional space, each with their own stories, their own dramas unfolding. The thought was oddly comforting. Eleanor wasn't alone in her struggles. She was simply experiencing her own version of the human condition. At precisely 8:45, Eleanor gathered her purse and the folder of documents Frank had provided and headed out to her car. Patricia Lawson's office was only a 10-minute drive from the hotel, located in a converted Victorian house that now housed several professional practices. As Eleanor parked, her phone rang. Melissa's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, Eleanor answered. "Mom?" Melissa's voice sounded small, younger somehow. "Where are you? I've been calling all night." "I'm safe," Eleanor replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I needed some space to think." "You can't just disappear like that. I was worried sick. I almost called the police to file a missing person report." The concern in her daughter's voice sparked a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by her next words. "Besides, we need to talk about the accounts. Everything's been canceled, Mom. Everything. The mortgage company called this morning. The electricity might be shut off by the end of the week. How could you do this to us?" Eleanor closed her eyes, willing herself to remain calm. "I explained my position yesterday, Melissa. I'm no longer in a position to support you and Jason financially. So you're just cutting us off? After everything we've done for you?" The audacity of the statement left Eleanor momentarily speechless. "Everything you've done for me?" she finally managed. "Yes. We gave you a place to live when you had nowhere else to go after Dad died. We included you in our lives. Our home. My home," Eleanor corrected. "Purchased with my money. Maintained with my money. The home where I've cooked your meals, cleaned your messes, and endured your husband's increasingly disrespectful behavior for 3 years. That's not fair." "No, it wasn't fair. None of it was fair. But that's beside the point now." Eleanor checked her watch. Her meeting with Patricia would start in 5 minutes. "I have an appointment I need to get to. We can discuss this later when we're both calmer." "Mom, please." Melissa's voice cracked. Jason left. Eleanor froze, her hand on the car door handle. "What do you mean? He left? Last night, after you went away. We had a huge fight. I found more gambling receipts in his email. Thousands of dollars, Mom. So much money. When I confronted him, he packed a bag and said he needed space to figure things out." Melissa's breath hitched. "He hasn't come home. He isn't answering his phone. I don't know what to do." A complicated mix of emotions washed over Eleanor. Concern for her daughter, vindication that her suspicions about Jason had been correct, and, shamefully, a small spark of satisfaction that the house of cards was finally collapsing. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said carefully, "but I have this appointment that I really can't miss. Can I call you afterward?" "An appointment? What could possibly be more important than your daughter's marriage falling apart?" Melissa's voice had regained its edge. "My financial security," Eleanor replied simply. "I'll call you in a couple of hours." She ended the call before Melissa could respond, guilt and resolve warring within her. As she climbed the steps to Patricia Lawson's office, Eleanor reminded herself that this boundary setting was long overdue. Melissa was a grown woman, not a child. She needed to face the consequences of her choices, even if those consequences were painful. Patricia Lawson was a striking woman in her early 60s, with short silver hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. Her handshake was firm, her office impeccably organized, and her manner both professional and warmly empathetic, a rare combination that immediately put Eleanor at ease. "Frank Martinez speaks very highly of you," Patricia said, as they settled into comfortable chairs across from her antique desk. "He outlined your situation, but I'd like to hear it from you if you don't mind. Start from the beginning." For the next 45 minutes, Eleanor recounted the events of the past 3 years. Thomas's death, the gift of the house to Melissa and Jason, her gradual assumption of all household expenses, the discovery of Jason's gambling and fraudulent activities, and finally, yesterday's confrontation and departure. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but mostly maintaining eye contact, her expression attentive and non-judgmental. When Eleanor finished, Patricia set down her pen and leaned forward slightly. "First, let me say how sorry I am that you're going through this. Family financial disputes are among the most emotionally complex issues I deal with." She tapped her notes. "Based on what you've told me, we need to address several areas immediately. The house, of course, is the primary concern. You say the deed is still in your name?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes. I had planned to transfer ownership once Melissa and Jason were financially stable, but that never happened." "That's fortunate. It gives us a stronger position." Patricia opened a folder on her desk. "The forgery issue is serious. Have you decided whether you wish to pursue criminal charges?" "Not yet," Eleanor admitted. "Part of me feels I should, if only to create a paper trail in case Jason tries something like this again. But I'm concerned about how it would affect Melissa." Patricia's expression was sympathetic but direct. "I understand your hesitation, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that failing to report fraud often enables the perpetrator to continue their behavior with other victims. Your son-in-law has demonstrated a willingness to commit financial crimes. Today, it's forging your signature. Tomorrow, it could be identity theft or worse." The thought sent a chill through Eleanor. "You're right. I should file a report. I have a contact at the district attorney's office," Patricia offered. "We can arrange a meeting where you can explain the circumstances. They may be willing to consider a plea arrangement that includes mandatory financial counseling and gambling addiction treatment rather than incarceration, especially if this is Jason's first offense." "And what about the house?" Eleanor asked. "Melissa called this morning. Apparently, Jason has left, and she's panicking about the mortgage payment." Patricia's expression turned thoughtful. "That depends on what outcome you want. Legally, you have several options. You could sell the house and use the proceeds to establish yourself elsewhere. You could maintain ownership but charge Melissa fair market rent if she wishes to remain there. Or you could proceed with the original plan to transfer ownership, but with stricter conditions in place. What would those conditions look like? A formal agreement stipulating that the property cannot be used as collateral for loans without your explicit consent. Provisions for what happens if Melissa and Jason divorce. Perhaps even a clause requiring financial counseling before the transfer occurs." Patricia smiled slightly. "I've drawn up many such agreements for parents helping adult children with property purchases. They're quite common and can prevent exactly the kind of situation you're facing now." Eleanor considered these options, weighing them against what she knew of Melissa's current state. "I need time to think about this, and I should probably see Melissa face-to-face before making any decisions about the house." "Of course," Patricia agreed. "In the meantime, I'll prepare documentation to secure your financial accounts further and draft a statement regarding the forgery for the police. We don't have to file it immediately, but having it ready will save time if you decide to proceed." They spent another hour discussing specifics, power of attorney documents, updated will provisions, credit monitoring services, and steps to protect Eleanor's identity from future theft attempts. By the time the meeting concluded, Eleanor felt more grounded than she had in days, armed with a clear understanding of her options and a concrete plan for moving forward. As she left Patricia's office, Eleanor checked her phone to find 3 more missed calls from Melissa and a text message that simply read, "The bank says foreclosure proceedings will begin in 30 days if the mortgage isn't paid. Please call me." Eleanor stared at the message, her newfound resolve wavering slightly. It would be so easy to fall back into old patterns, to rush to Melissa's rescue yet again. But Patricia's words echoed in her mind. Enabling behavior rarely helps the person being enabled. With steady fingers, Eleanor typed a response. "I have an appointment to look at apartments this afternoon. I can meet you for dinner at Carson's Cafe at 6 to discuss options. This is a situation we need to handle face to face." She hit send before she could reconsider, then started her car and headed toward the first of 3 apartment viewings she had scheduled. Whatever happened with Melissa and the house, Eleanor needed a place of her own. A fresh start, untethered from the weight of others' expectations and demands. As she drove, Eleanor found herself thinking about Thomas again. "You'd be proud of me today," she whispered to his memory. "I'm finally learning to value myself the way you always did." Carson's Cafe was busier than usual for a weekday evening. Eleanor arrived 15 minutes early, securing the last available table in the back corner, where the ambient noise would provide some privacy for what promised to be a difficult conversation. She ordered a pot of tea, chamomile, to calm her nerves, and waited. Her apartment hunt had been surprisingly successful. The second property she'd viewed, a sunlit 1-bedroom in a well-maintained building just 10 minutes from downtown, had immediately felt right. It was smaller than she was accustomed to, with rent that would stretch her pension slightly, but the landlord had been impressed by her impeccable credit and banking background. She'd signed a 6-month lease on the spot, with move-in possible as early as next week. Having a concrete plan, a physical space to call her own, had solidified Eleanor's resolve. She was no longer a woman adrift. She was a woman rebuilding. The cafe door opened, and Melissa entered. Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight of her daughter. In just 24 hours, Melissa seemed to have aged years. Her usually neat hair hung limp around her face, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her shoulders slumped with visible exhaustion. She scanned the room, spotted Eleanor, and made her way to the table with hesitant steps. "Mom," she said simply, sliding into the chair opposite. "Melissa," Eleanor replied, pushing aside her instinctive urge to fuss and comfort. This meeting needed to remain focused. "Would you like some tea? Or perhaps something stronger?" "Just water, thanks," Melissa mumbled, not quite meeting Eleanor's eyes. "I haven't been able to keep much down today." Eleanor signaled the waitress and ordered water for Melissa and a sandwich platter to share. Once they were alone again, she waited, giving her daughter space to begin the conversation. "Jason emptied our joint checking account," Melissa finally said, her voice flat. $6,243. Every penny we had. Well, every penny I had. Apparently, he hasn't contributed to that account in months. Eleanor absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally she felt a surge of anger toward her son-in-law. "Do you know where he is?" Melissa shook her head. "His friend Marcus said he mentioned Atlantic City, but I don't know if that's true. His phone goes straight to voicemail." She looked up, her eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "How could I have been so blind, Mom? How did I not see what was happening right in front of me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with layers of meaning that extended far beyond Jason's deception. How had Melissa not seen her husband's gambling addiction? How had she not recognized his manipulation and lies? How had she not noticed her mother's growing unhappiness in a household where she was increasingly treated as a servant rather than family? "We see what we want to see," Eleanor said gently. "We believe what we need to believe, until reality forces us to confront the truth. You saw it, Melissa countered, a hint of accusation in her tone. You tried to warn me about Jason's spending, his late nights, his excuses. I shut you down every time. I'm your mother. I was looking for warning signs because I wanted to protect you. And I threw that protection back in your face. Melissa's voice cracked. I chose him over you. God, I even supported him when he wanted you to leave. The only person who's always been there for me. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how you can even stand to look at me right now. Eleanor reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Despite everything, the maternal instinct to comfort remained powerful. You're my child, Melissa. Nothing will ever change that. Not poor choices, not harsh words, not even betrayal. The waitress arrived with Melissa's water and the sandwich platter, temporarily halting their conversation. Eleanor used the interruption to collect her thoughts, to remind herself of the boundaries she needed to maintain even in the face of her daughter's distress. Once they were alone again, Eleanor continued, But loving you doesn't mean I can rescue you from the consequences of your decisions. Not anymore. Melissa nodded, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. I know. The bank called again this morning, and the electric company, and the water department. It's like the whole world knows our financial house of cards has collapsed. She attempted a small, bitter laugh that transformed into a sob. I don't know what to do, Mom. I don't know how to fix this. You start by facing reality, Eleanor said firmly. No more denial. No more magical thinking that somehow things will work out if you just ignore the problems long enough. Easy for you to say. You've always been good with money. Being good with money isn't some innate talent, Melissa. It's a skill developed through discipline and often learned through mistakes. Eleanor broke a sandwich in half and placed a portion on Melissa's plate. Eat something. You need your strength. Melissa obediently took a small bite, though she seemed to struggle to swallow. So what happens now? With the house, I mean. The mortgage officer said foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days. Eleanor sipped her tea, considering her response carefully. This was the moment that would define their relationship moving forward. I've had some time to think about our situation, and I've consulted with a lawyer about our options. Our options? I thought you were washing your hands of everything. I'm setting boundaries, not abandoning you, Eleanor corrected. There's a difference. Pete. She outlined the 3 possibilities Patricia had presented. Selling the house, maintaining ownership but charging Melissa rent, or proceeding with the transfer of ownership under stricter conditions. The third option is what I'm leaning toward, Eleanor concluded, but it would come with non-negotiable requirements. Melissa's expression was guarded. What kind of requirements? First, complete financial transparency. I would need access to all accounts to monitor spending until you've demonstrated responsible financial management for at least 1 year. That sounds like you don't trust me. I trust that you want to do better, Eleanor replied evenly. But trust has to be rebuilt, Melissa. You and Jason concealed significant financial issues from me while continuing to accept my support. That breach can't be ignored. Melissa flinched, but didn't argue the point. What else? Financial counseling, both for basic money management and to address any spending compulsions you might have developed. Patricia can recommend someone who specializes in couples affected by gambling addiction. I'm not an addict, Melissa protested. No, but you've been living with one, and that affects your financial behavior too. Research shows partners often develop enabling patterns or compensatory spending habits. Melissa seemed about to object further, but then deflated. Fine. Financial counseling. What else? The house could not be used as collateral for any loans without my explicit written consent, and that consent would never be given for gambling debts. Eleanor paused before adding the final condition. And if you and Jason reconcile, he would need to agree to both counseling and a legal agreement protecting the property. At the mention of reconciliation, Melissa's face darkened. That's not going to happen. Not after what he did. Not after he stole from me and forged your signature. People have forgiven worse, Eleanor observed neutrally. Would you? Forgive him, I mean? Eleanor considered the question carefully. Forgiveness and trust are separate issues. I might eventually forgive Jason for my own peace of mind, but I would never trust him with my financial security again. Nor should you. They fell silent, each woman lost in her own thoughts as the cafe bustled around them. Eleanor finished her tea while Melissa picked listlessly at her sandwich. I filed a police report this afternoon, Eleanor finally said, about the forgery. Melissa's head snapped up. You what? Jason committed fraud, Melissa. That's a serious crime. My lawyer advised me to create an official record in case he attempts something similar in the future. Seeing her daughter's stricken expression, Eleanor added, I emphasized to the detective that I was open to alternative sentencing focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment, assuming Jason cooperates. He'll never forgive me if he goes to jail. His forgiveness isn't your concern right now. Your financial survival is. Eleanor's tone softened. Besides, it's unlikely he'll face incarceration for a first offense, especially if he enters treatment for his gambling addiction. Melissa pushed her plate away, barely a quarter of her sandwich eaten. So, that's it? I either accept your conditions or lose the house. Those aren't punitive terms, Melissa. They're protective ones, for both of us. Eleanor met her daughter's gaze directly. I won't set you up to fail again by giving you more than you're prepared to handle responsibly. That wouldn't be love. It would be negligence. Something in Melissa's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition passing across her features. That's what Dad used to say when I'd ask for things I wasn't ready for. It's not love to give you what would harm you. He was a wise man, Eleanor said softly, and he would be heartbroken to see what's happened between us. Fresh tears welled in Melissa's eyes. I miss him so much, Mom. Every day. And I keep thinking, if Dad were still alive, none of this would have happened. Jason wouldn't have dared treat him the way he treated you. I wouldn't have allowed it. The words stung, but Eleanor recognized their truth. Thomas had commanded a different kind of respect, not because he was male, but because he had never allowed anyone to diminish his worth. Somewhere along the way, in her grief and loneliness, Eleanor had forgotten that lesson. Your father isn't here, she said quietly, but I am, and I'm finally learning to advocate for myself the way he always did, for both of us. I'm sorry, Melissa whispered, for everything, for how we treated you, for the things I said, for not seeing what was happening with Jason. I know you are. Eleanor reached across the table again, this time to brush a strand of hair from her daughter's face, a maternal gesture as old as time. But apologies are just the beginning. Real amends require changed behavior. I want to change. I want to fix this. I just don't know if I can do it alone. You're not alone, Eleanor assured her. I'll help you navigate this process, but as a guide, not a savior. There's a difference. For the first time that evening, Melissa managed a small but genuine smile. That sounds like something Dad would say too. We were married for 31 years. Some of his wisdom was bound to rub off eventually. They spent the next hour outlining a concrete plan. Eleanor would make the upcoming mortgage payment to prevent immediate foreclosure proceedings, giving Melissa time to find employment beyond her part-time nursing position. Melissa would contact the financial counselor Patricia had recommended and begin the process of untangling her finances from Jason's. They would meet with Patricia together next week to formalize the house agreement. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Melissa hesitated. Where are you staying? You could come home. I mean, to the house. It would be just us. Eleanor shook her head. I've signed a lease on an apartment. I move in next week. Oh. Disappointment clouded Melissa's features. I thought maybe we both need our own space right now, Eleanor said gently. Physical and emotional. You need to learn independence, and I need to reclaim mine. Melissa nodded reluctantly. Can I at least know where? In case of emergencies? Eleanor wrote the address on a napkin and passed it to her daughter. "I'm only 10 minutes away. Not too close, not too far." "Like the Three Bears," Melissa murmured, a childhood reference to their favorite bedtime story. "Just right." Outside the cafe, they embraced briefly, the physical contact both comforting and tentative, a reflection of their relationship's current state. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Eleanor felt a curious lightness in her chest. The road ahead would not be easy for either of them, but for the first time in years, it felt like they were moving in the right direction. Eleanor returned to the Riverside Hotel, her temporary home for the next week. As she prepared for bed, her phone chimed with a text message from Melissa. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I love you, Mom." Such simple words, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 conversations. Eleanor typed back, "I never will. Love you too." Sleep came easier that night, though Eleanor's dreams were still punctuated with fragments of worry and unresolved questions. Would Melissa follow through with financial counseling? Would Jason return, full of remorse and promises to change? Would the fragile new understanding between mother and daughter withstand the pressures of rebuilding their individual lives? Morning arrived with no answers, only the certainty that each day would bring its own challenges and choices. Eleanor dressed in comfortable clothes and headed down to the hotel lobby for coffee, her mind already mapping out the day's tasks. Meeting with a moving company, shopping for essential furniture for her new apartment, scheduling utilities connections. As she sat sipping her coffee, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number she didn't recognize. "Eleanor Wilson speaking," she answered professionally. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Detective Harris with the County Police Department. We've located Jason Bennett." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "You have?" "Yes, ma'am. He was picked up last night at the Diamond Palace Casino for disorderly conduct. During processing, our system flagged your fraud report." "I see. Is he in custody?" "Yes, ma'am. He's being held on the fraud charges pending a bail hearing this afternoon. Given the nature of the offense and his behavior at the casino, the judge is unlikely to release him without significant conditions." Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing this development. "Thank you for letting me know, Detective. Would it be possible for me to speak with the district attorney about this case? My lawyer mentioned the possibility of treatment requirements as part of any resolution." "Of course. I'll have the DA's office contact you directly." The detective paused before adding, "Mrs. Wilson, you should be prepared. Mr. Bennett was quite vocal about his displeasure with you when he learned of the fraud charges. You might want to consider a restraining order." A chill ran through Eleanor at the implication. "I'll discuss that with my lawyer. Thank you again, Detective." After ending the call, Eleanor sat motionless, her coffee cooling before her. Jason's arrest complicated matters enormously. Melissa would need to be told. Decisions about pressing forward with charges would need to be made. Protective measures might need to be implemented. Just when the path had seemed to clarify, new obstacles had emerged. But as Eleanor gathered her purse and car keys, she realized something important had changed. She was no longer approaching these challenges from a position of weakness or obligation. She was facing them as a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who could extend compassion without sacrificing her boundaries. Whatever came next, Eleanor would meet it standing firmly on her own ground. 6 months had passed since that fateful day when Eleanor had walked out of her daughter's house with nothing but a suitcase and her dignity intact. 6 months of rebuilding, restructuring, and rediscovering herself. 6 months that had transformed not only her own life, but Melissa's as well. Eleanor stood on the small balcony of her apartment, coffee mug in hand, watching the early morning sun illuminate the town below. Her one-bedroom space had evolved from a sparse temporary shelter into a true home, filled with carefully chosen furniture, framed photographs of happier times, and fresh flowers that she bought herself every Sunday. A small luxury that reminded her of her own worth. The apartment complex faced east, providing spectacular sunrises that Eleanor had come to cherish. This simple pleasure, watching daybreak over the horizon, had become a sacred ritual, a quiet moment of reflection before facing whatever challenges the day might bring. And there had been many challenges over these past 6 months. Jason's arrest had been only the beginning. The district attorney, sympathetic to Eleanor's situation, but unwilling to dismiss serious fraud charges, had offered a plea deal. 6 months in a minimum security facility, followed by 2 years of probation, mandatory financial counseling, and gambling addiction treatment. Jason had initially refused, insisting he could beat the charges until his court-appointed attorney had bluntly outlined the evidence against him and the potential for a much longer sentence if convicted at trial. Eleanor could still remember Melissa's face during Jason's sentencing hearing. The complex mixture of grief, anger, embarrassment, and relief that had played across her features as the judge delivered the terms. They had sat side by side in the courtroom, mother and daughter united in their determination to move forward, regardless of the outcome. Jason had not looked at either of them as he was led away. The divorce proceedings had begun shortly afterward. With Patricia Lawson's help, Melissa had filed on grounds of financial misconduct and abandonment. The process was ongoing, complicated by Jason's incarceration and his sporadic attempts to contest the settlement terms, but the end was finally in sight. Eleanor's phone chimed, interrupting her reverie. A text message from Melissa. "All set for today? Need me to bring anything besides the cake?" Eleanor smiled as she typed her response. "Just yourself. Everything else is ready." "Siti." She added a heart emoji, a small gesture of affection that had once seemed too sentimental, but now felt natural and necessary. Today was a special day. Not only was it Eleanor's 53rd birthday, but it also marked the official transfer of the house deed to Melissa's name alone. After 6 months of financial counseling, steady employment at the hospital, and demonstrated responsibility with her rebuilt credit, Melissa had fulfilled all the conditions Eleanor and Patricia had established. The house that had once been a source of such conflict was now a symbol of new beginnings. Melissa had transformed it over the past months, selling most of the furniture Jason had selected and replacing it with simpler, more meaningful pieces. She had converted the master bedroom, too laden with painful memories, into a home office where she now managed her finances with meticulous care. The spare room where Eleanor had once stayed had become a guest room again, ready for her mother's occasional visits, but no longer her permanent residence. Both women had needed that separation to heal. Eleanor finished her coffee and went inside to prepare for the day. She had returned to work at First National Bank 3 months ago, accepting Frank's offer of a position as a financial counselor. The role was different from her previous work, more focused on helping individuals develop sound money management skills than on complex investment strategies, but she had discovered a genuine passion for it. Many of her clients were women in situations not unlike her own. Widows managing finances for the first time, divorcees rebuilding after financial betrayal, single mothers struggling to balance immediate needs with long-term security. Eleanor's personal experience, combined with her professional expertise, made her uniquely qualified to guide them. "You're not just teaching them about money," Frank had observed after sitting in on one of her client sessions. "You're teaching them about self-worth." Eleanor had been surprised by the insight, but she recognized its truth. Financial independence and personal dignity were inextricably linked, a lesson she had learned the hard way. As she dressed in a lovely yellow blouse, a color she had once avoided as too bright, too noticeable, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her bore little resemblance to the diminished figure who had stared back from the hotel bathroom mirror 6 months ago. This Eleanor stood straighter, her eyes clearer, her smile more genuine. The lines on her face remained, but they no longer seemed like marks of weariness. They were evidence of a life fully lived, with all its joys and sorrows embraced equally. Her phone chimed again, a reminder that Frank would be picking her up in 30 minutes for the celebration lunch. Their friendship had deepened over these months, gradually evolving into something more. They were taking things slowly, both aware of the complexities involved in beginning a relationship at their age, with their histories. But there was a comfortable rightness to their connection that gave Eleanor hope for this new chapter. The doorbell rang precisely at 11:30. Frank was, as always, punctual to a fault. Eleanor opened the door to find him standing there with a bouquet of tulips, her favorite flower, a detail he had remembered from a casual conversation months ago. "Happy birthday," he said, presenting the flowers with a slight bow that made her laugh. "Thank you." She accepted the bouquet, inhaling their subtle fragrance. "They're beautiful, as are you," Frank replied, the simple compliment delivered with such sincerity that Eleanor felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Flatterer," she teased, turning to place the flowers in water. "Come in for a moment. I just need to grab my purse and jacket." Frank followed her inside, looking around the apartment with appreciation. "You've made some changes since my last visit. The new artwork? A gift from Melissa," Eleanor explained, gesturing to the watercolor landscape hanging above her small dining table. "She found it at a local artist's gallery last month, said it reminded her of the lake where we used to vacation when she was young." "It's lovely," Frank observed, "and thoughtful." "Yes, she is." Eleanor smiled, thinking of how much her relationship with her daughter had evolved. The painful honesty of those early conversations had gradually given way to a deeper understanding, a more authentic connection than they had shared in years. They still had their moments of tension. Old patterns didn't disappear overnight, but they now had tools to navigate those difficulties without retreating into resentment or enabling behaviors. "Ready?" Frank asked, offering his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "Ready?" Eleanor confirmed, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. The restaurant Melissa had chosen for the celebration was a charming Italian place downtown, intimate without being pretentious. When Eleanor and Frank arrived, they found Melissa already seated at a corner table, a wrapped gift and a small cake box placed carefully before her. "Mom!" Melissa rose to embrace Eleanor, the gesture warm and genuine. "Happy birthday." "Thank you, sweetheart." Eleanor returned the hug, noting how much healthier her daughter looked now. The dark circles gone, her complexion glowing, her eyes clear and focused. "Frank, good to see you again," Melissa added, extending her hand to Eleanor's companion. Their relationship had been initially awkward, Melissa unsure how to react to this new presence in her mother's life. But over time, a respectful friendliness had developed between them. As they settled at the table, a waiter appeared with a bottle of champagne. Frank's surprise, judging by his satisfied expression. "This calls for a proper toast," he declared, as the waiter poured 3 glasses. "To Eleanor, on her birthday, and to new beginnings for all of us." "To new beginnings," Melissa echoed, raising her glass. The diamond ring that had once adorned her left hand was gone, replaced by a simple silver band she wore on her right, a gift to herself when her promotion to head nurse had been announced last month. Eleanor looked from Frank to Melissa, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of gratitude. 6 months ago, she could not have imagined sitting here like this, surrounded by authentic care, rather than obligation and resentment. The journey had been painful, the losses real and significant. Yet, somehow, through standing firm in her own worth, she had not only reclaimed her dignity, but had helped foster something new and precious in her relationships. "Before we order," Melissa said, sliding an envelope across the table, "this is for you. Not exactly a birthday gift, more of a milestone marker." Eleanor opened the envelope to find the deed to the house, officially transferred to Melissa's name alone, along with a handwritten note. "Mom, this house is now truly mine. Not because it was given to me, but because I've earned it. Thank you for believing I could, even when I didn't believe it myself. Your courage in walking away taught me more than years of having everything handled for me ever did. Love always, Melissa." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes as she read the note. "Oh, Melissa." I mean every word, her daughter said softly. When you left that day, I was so angry, so hurt. I couldn't understand how you could abandon me when I needed you most. She paused, taking a steadying breath. But you didn't abandon me. You gave me the chance to find my own strength, a strength I never would have discovered if you'd kept rescuing me. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, Eleanor admitted, walking away when every instinct told me to stay and fix everything for you. I know that now. Melissa reached across the table to squeeze her mother's hand. And I've realized something else, too. The day you left, you weren't just teaching me about financial responsibility. You were showing me what self-respect looks like. Frank, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, discreetly signaled the waiter for water, giving mother and daughter space for this important exchange. I never want to go back to how things were, Melissa continued. Not just with Jason, but with how I treated you, taking you for granted, expecting you to serve and support us without appreciation or reciprocity. Her voice caught. I'm so sorry, Mom. We both made mistakes, Eleanor said gently. I enabled behaviors that weren't healthy for any of us. I thought I was showing love, but I was actually preventing you from growing. Well, I've certainly grown now, Melissa said with a small laugh, wiping away a tear. Sometimes I feel like I've aged 10 years in these past 6 months. Not aged, Eleanor corrected. Matured. There's a difference. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics as lunch was served. Melissa shared news from the hospital, her growing responsibilities, a mentorship program she had joined, plans for additional certification that would further advance her career. Eleanor spoke about her work at the bank, the satisfaction she found in helping others navigate financial challenges. Frank contributed occasional anecdotes that kept them laughing, his warm presence a reminder that life could offer unexpected joys at any age. As they finished their meal, the waiter brought out the small cake Melissa had brought, Eleanor's favorite lemon and blueberry, made from Thomas's recipe. I tried 3 times before I got it right, Melissa confessed, as she lit the single candle. Dad always made it look so easy. He would be so proud of you, Eleanor said, her heart full. Not because you mastered his cake recipe, but because of the woman you've become. Strong, independent, resilient, like her mother, Frank added quietly. Eleanor closed her eyes, made a silent wish, and blew out the candle. Around her, the restaurant continued its midday bustle. Other lives, other stories unfolding in parallel to her own. 6 months ago, she had sat in a hotel room feeling utterly alone, displaced from the life she had built. Now, here she was, surrounded by genuine love and respect, embarking on a future she had created through courage and self-advocacy. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Melissa received a text message that made her expression turn serious. It's from my lawyer, she explained. Jason's being released next week. His sentence was reduced for good behavior. Eleanor felt a momentary tightening in her chest. How do you feel about that? Honestly, I'm okay. Melissa tucked her phone away. The restraining order is still in place. The divorce is almost final. He can't hurt me anymore. Not financially, not emotionally. I've moved on. Frank excused himself to take care of the bill, giving Eleanor a private moment with her daughter. You know, Eleanor said softly, true healing isn't about never feeling pain when you think about the past. It's about the pain no longer controlling your future. Is that how you felt after Dad died? Melissa asked. Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. Eventually, yes. The grief doesn't disappear, but it transforms. It becomes part of your story rather than the end of it. That's how I feel about Jason now, Melissa said. What we had, what we lost, what I learned, it's part of my story. But it's not the whole story, and it's certainly not the end. Frank returned, and they stepped out into the bright afternoon sunshine. The town stretched before them, familiar, yet somehow new, filled with possibilities that hadn't been visible 6 months ago. I should get back to work, Melissa said, checking her watch. Some of us don't get the luxury of a full day off for birthday celebrations. The teasing tone removed any sting from the words. "Go save lives," Eleanor replied, embracing her daughter once more. "I'll call you tomorrow." As Melissa walked toward her car, Eleanor watched her go with a heart both full and peaceful. The journey they had traveled together, through grief, betrayal, reconciliation, and growth, had not been easy. There had been moments when the pain seemed too great to bear, when the easier path would have been to give in, give up, return to familiar patterns even knowing they were destructive. But they had persevered. They had chosen the harder road, the one that demanded truth and accountability. And now, 6 months later, they were reaping the rewards of that difficult choice. "She's remarkable," Frank observed, following Eleanor's gaze. "Like her mother." Eleanor turned to him with a smile. "We're both works in progress." "Aren't we all?" he replied, offering his arm once more. "Now, birthday girl, the day is still young. What would you like to do next?" Eleanor considered the question. This simple luxury of choosing how to spend her time based solely on her own desires. 6 months ago, such a choice would have seemed impossible. Her days dictated by others' needs and expectations. "Let's walk by the lake," she decided. "It's too beautiful a day to waste indoors." As they strolled along the waterfront, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the strange path that had led her here. If Jason had never issued that ultimatum, if Melissa had never chosen his side, if Eleanor had never found the courage to walk away, where would she be now? Still cooking their meals, cleaning their house, paying their bills, slowly disappearing into the background of their lives? The thought made her shudder despite the warm sunshine. "Cold?" Frank asked, misinterpreting her reaction. "No," Eleanor replied, "just grateful." "For what?" "For the ultimatum that set me free." She stopped walking and turned to face him, suddenly needing to articulate the realization that had been forming within her. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lost everything. My home, my daughter, my purpose. I was so focused on what was ending that I couldn't see what might be beginning. Frank's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. Beginnings often disguise themselves as endings. "Exactly." Eleanor nodded. "When I walked out that door with just my suitcase, I thought I was leaving my whole life behind. But really, I was walking toward a life that was actually mine, not one defined by what others needed from me." "And how does that life feel now?" Frank asked, his hand finding hers as they resumed their walk. Eleanor considered the question, taking in the beauty around her, the sparkling lake, the clear blue sky, the solid presence of the man beside her, the knowledge that her daughter was finding her own path with newfound strength and wisdom. "It feels like coming home," she said simply, "not to a place, but to myself." As they rounded the curve of the lakeshore path, the sun cast their shadows long behind them, 2 figures moving forward together, their past not forgotten, but no longer defining their future. Eleanor had lost much in these past 6 months, but she had gained something far more precious. The knowledge that true worth came not from what you gave to others, but from what you demanded of yourself. She had walked away from a life of servitude disguised as love, and in doing so, had found her way back to authentic love for her daughter, for the possibilities of new romance, and, most importantly, for herself. The ultimatum that had been meant to control her had instead become the key to her freedom. And for that unexpected gift, Eleanor was profoundly, eternally grateful. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.